You all ready for Ben's campaign tonight?
Why no?
Why not?
You sold me into slavery last session.
Oh, are you still mad about that thing?
For 7 Electrum. Do you even know how much 7 Electrum is? Because I don't.
No, it sounded kind of fancy. Sounded like a good deal. If only there had been a YouTube video that could teach me how to be a better player. Hey everyone, welcome to Unqualified Experts. I am your corrupt overlord and not a great player, Shane.
And I'm Braden Gardner, your other disgruntled host who was sold into slavery for 7 Electrum.
Turns out I failed that barter check and Ben didn't tell me. Which actually makes a lot of sense in retrospect.
We all knew. I even think you secretly knew. Yeah, that's what I thought.
So guys, welcome to another episode. Glad to see you. And, we have had good games, we have had bad games, and we can always use a little bit of a refresher course on tips to being a better player. And that is the topic we are going to be tackling today. Probably goes without saying, try not to sell anyone in your party into slavery unless that's a major plot point for like an inside heist job.
Or unless it's really, really worth it.
More than 7 Electrium.
I mean, 5,000 gold minimum.
So, seems like a good topic to tackle. And so for whether you're a brand new player or you're just looking for a little bit of a review, we did a little bit of brainstorming and came up with what really are, in a lot of ways, they're the little things that make a really big difference. And one of the biggest things to remember with any tabletop RPG is that you're telling a collective story. And so while it can be easy to get really excited about an individual character you're playing or a situation you're in, sometimes you just gotta take that step back and remember that, because you want everybody to be having a good time. And the best campaigns, at least in my experience, are the ones where everyone does kind of jump in and have their moment. And so kind of going with that, we'll start with our base rule, which is simple. It's also avoiding one of the big mistakes way too many new players make. Kind of going with the don't play the rugged loner. Have a reason to trust the party. You want to jump in ranting on this first, or shall I?
Oh, I can jump in. I mean, part of being a good player in a collective storytelling experience is going to be giving yourself a motivation that works toward the overall storytelling goal. It doesn't have to be part of the overarching campaign as a whole, but if you don't have a reason to be there, it becomes very difficult at times for you to become invested in the campaign as a person and not just as a player character.
Yeah.
I've seen instances where I've been in groups where we've had players who aren't super invested in the party and are basically loner types who go off and do their own thing, and when the spotlight's not on them, you can find them playing around on a laptop or having a side conversation with someone else and being overall fairly disruptive to the actual RPG that you're playing.
Yeah, and I do find that for people who are trying to do that loner character, they never have as much fun in those campaigns either, because it is that community type thing going on. And when we say have a reason to trust the party, like, look, if you are a character with a really weird backstory, or you got betrayed by a group, or you're seeking revenge, you don't have to trust everyone with your life from day one, but you need a reason to buy into the campaign. That can be anything from, you know what, I'm up for some adventuring and I want to get out of this town because you're that naive character who wants some adventure. It can be the ranger who knows there's trouble and he just can't handle it by himself. You could be a paladin and your lord told you to, so deal with it. You know what? Those are all good reasons. You could be a rogue and someone gave you 10 gold and you know what? It's been a rough few months. There hasn't been great trade. The reasons can be completely varied. It could be as simple as, oh, all hell's breaking loose. 4 of us have a better chance than 1. But just, it doesn't take much to have that initial reason to join the party. And just from that series of examples, you can do about any character background and borrow one of those, and it's going to fit. Like, well, I want to be a loner and I have a hard time trusting. Great, if you're a rogue, you got 10 gold, and you don't want to die.
But say you're not a rogue.
Yeah.
You could be playing a mercenary. That's kind of the go-to for a lot of our groups who are not sure about why they're adventuring with the rest of these people up front. It's literally, someone paid me money to be here and look after you fools.
Or this classic, well, you can do this or you can go to prison. I'll adventure then, you know?
Yeah.
Sometimes the classics work. That kind of goes a little bit into the next one. And kind of the basic rule, and good rule of life in general, just don't be a dick. If you're getting together in a group to do a cooperative game, we assume you want to be there. There's a reason you want to be with that group. You want to participate in the story. And look, we have all had good campaigns. We've all had bad campaigns. We've all had good days. We've all had bad days. And even within the game, just know your table. Like in our group, we'll tell a lot of stories where you could say, wow, you guys are kind of dicks to each other. We've also gamed together for 6 years, so we know how much we can push the line. Or in like one group of mine, oh, you can be a dick as long as it's funny. It's a completely legitimate rule. In another group I've played with, that will get you into all kinds of trouble and hassle. And that doesn't mean I necessarily prefer one group over the other, but it's just understanding that, okay, I can push the line over here where it's really funny with this group because they have the same sense of humor. If this other group doesn't, then I just want to play a little bit differently. I can still be a troublemaker, I can still do my thing, but the way I go about it's going to be a little bit different. And it's simple. Sometimes you'll misstep. If you go too far, apologize. You know? Just don't be a dick. A little bit of compassion goes a long way. And, you know, assuming you show up to a game, you want to have fun, you want to have good memories, and, yeah, there's really not much more to that, I think.
No, I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head there. If you're in a group that is made up of people you've been friends with or have known for a long time, you don't necessarily have to go to a lot of extra effort to not be a jerk during sessions. Like, you know what's going to upset certain people at the table at that point. You know what people are going to find funny, and you're able to pretty easily use those boundaries to be a contributing member of the table. For newer groups, you have to take the extra step of reading the room. You need to maybe take a couple, 3 sessions where maybe if you're inclined to being a bit of a prankster in game, maybe rein that in for a little bit until you get an idea of how the rest of the table is going to react to being messed with at inconvenient times. Whether you have players who would take that super seriously, or whether you have people who are going to laugh it off and be like, that was clever. Don't do that again.
Yeah. And, you know, and depending on the campaign and the character and everything, you may run into the same person who has different reactions based on different campaigns or how the exact setup was. And you call those learning experiences. I mean, one of the things about the tips for being a better player here, I'm not going to speak for you, but I'll speak for you. I've been guilty of violating these at some point every time. I think if you play enough tabletop RPGs, at some point you'll have the off day or the bad day. You know, that's fine. People are pretty understanding. Just kind of learn from it. Apologize where necessary. and kind of move on or try to make it up in game. And sometimes that making it up can lead to some really hilarious side quests that go horribly wrong. Because you know what? A good DM will sometimes punish you in game in hilarious ways to make up for the you went one step too far over there. And it ends up working out to be this great side quest that it turns up. And it brings the group even closer together.
I know nothing of this. Nothing at all.
Uh-huh. Wait, you know I've got to do an animal check, Shane? No, not this time, buddy. So, and that kind of goes to the next one. You're a supporting actor, not the main star. And I think that can be a big one. And this is one I'm definitely guilty of at various times, and I try to be very mindful of. A campaign, you're not Brad Pitt with everyone there just to support every single thing your character does. Now, should you have fun? Yes. Should you have your shining moments? Yes. It is a good DM's job to give every player those moments, those sessions, or those times where they can absolutely shine. And so you want to give the DM enough to work with to provide those moments, but I think that's a really important one to remember is it is a group story. You are going in this together. And when the DM is giving you your moment to shine, absolutely, by all means, grab a hold of it, have fun, whether that's this steady big hero moment for you, whether it's the noble sacrifice, whether you're an idiot and tend to waste your big moments on hilarious things that end up getting the entire party in trouble and potentially derailing the campaign. You know, hypothetically. Every other time. Mm-hmm. You know, great. And then when you've had your moment, bask in the glow, make it a part of the story, and then see if you can help the DM create those moments for other players too. Because I definitely at a table, I notice when someone sets me up for a great moment, success, one-liner, whatever. And I'm always looking to return the favor at that point. It's entertaining, it drags you both further into the world and campaign, and it's a cool investment. And if you feel like there's a lot of campaign going on and you're just not getting to do much, talk to your DM after session, because it is the DM's job to make sure everyone's bought in and everyone's getting a chance to do their thing.
For sure. And this isn't strictly an issue where you can steal too much spotlight time just because you like to be involved in the story. Like, even if the spotlight's not on you at an exact moment, you can still be involved in the story. But when it starts stepping on other people's toes, that's where it really becomes a problem. And one of the places where that can really become an issue is if you're dealing with a character that is very mechanically intricate. Like, say you're a tinkerer and you love to build things out of random stuff you find. That's cool. But the party doesn't want to sit there for an hour while you're grilling the DM over 10, 20, 30 questions about, well, can I find this? Can I do X with Y? Can I do Y with Z? It grinds gameplay to a halt, and it basically makes it very, very difficult for other players to interact with what's going on because you've made the story about this one small thing and only about what your interest in that thing is.
Yeah.
There's a time and a place for it, and for something like that, it's just not going to come up terribly often in session.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And a lot of things, for an example of that, we run a lot of campaigns where you get to make custom things if you can come up with, well, I'd like to say a great idea, but sometimes it's funny. I can really stretch this and this to make it happen. Example, like our pirate in the gnome village who really wanted to make a laser pointer for the tabaxi. I was like, well, there's blinking light spells. Gnomes are tinkerers. But instead of spending minutes and minutes after session, I was like, if you're willing to waste 100 gold on this to irritate Braden's character a bit, and he's like, done. Cool. 100 gold. You'll have it next session. That way I have time to think of what the rules are for how to use it. And boom, it works. You know there's something going on in the background. Everyone's a little bit invested in this sudden little troublemaking you're doing. And the campaign gets to keep going on. You're not stealing the spotlight from anybody else.
Right. I mean, basically, you're not asking 700 questions about how do we make this? What do I need to make this happen?
Mm-hmm.
It is, here is a fixed thing. We will do all of the mechanical things behind the scenes, and that way when you get to use it, it is involving at least one other person and probably everyone in the vicinity.
Yeah. And I think that's, as long as you keep that in mind, there'll be moments where you get 2 or 3 minutes. That's not the problem here. It's when you jump in for 20 or 30. And we all have those interests, but in the middle of a table with 7 people in a campaign is not the time to drag that 30 minutes out.
Exactly.
And so one that I know we're both a fan of for a tip for being a better player, grow throughout the campaign. And I think the last character you did in mine, Maelstrom, was a fantastic example of this.
I agree. Maelstrom is a tabaxi to the shock of nobody of the Roaring River tribe. He's very proud of his noble bearing, and he's also pretty selfish, at least initially, as he meets the party. He's a cat, so everything belongs to him anyway. That's really not going to change much. But he also is very much in the self-centered looking out for number one mindset at the start of when he joins up with the group. And over time, he kind of slowly starts stepping out of that mindset and actually takes the time to learn a little something from each of the characters around him. Like, he learns the benefits of expanding into divine magic from the cleric. He learns some of the fighting style spells from the war mage. He learns a little bit about managing a ship from the pirate. And is basically just picking up little pieces of information here and there that he wouldn't have bothered to seek out on his own in any capacity. And bringing up the example from earlier with the laser pointer, which was a thing that happened in-game. The laser pointer was based off of an intelligence check to figure out what it actually was. And intelligence was very much a dump stat for Maelstrom. So he literally spent several levels of Warlock, which was his primary class, trying to find a way to see through what was going on with the laser pointer until he finally ended up picking up True Sight. And then was able to not only figure out what was going on, his first use of it also accidentally spotted an invisible character in the corner of the tavern that we weren't supposed to see.
Yeah, I kind of tripped over my own feet running that one.
But it opened up another avenue for us to go, oh, this is a thing. We should investigate that. All off of a gag.
Yeah, and the thing I'll say about Maelstrom was, he was selfish not because everything had to always be about him too, but it was always, there was a very naive part to him too that allowed you to ask questions as a character or to see things, or after the first time you accidentally save the main villain, using perfect logic for your character and getting the rest of the party angry. But yeah, Evelord, maybe when these guys all jump on someone, maybe I should just trust them and kind of go along with it.
Yeah, I mean, that particular incident was Maelstrom asked them multiple times, what's going on? Why are you doing this? This argument seems perfectly reasonable. Didn't get an answer. Elected to act on his own. And it was only then that the party paid attention to what was going on and clarified what happened, at which point there was a very deer in the headlights type moment of, oh, I done messed up. I'ma just walk myself over to this jail now.
And it was a super funny moment, and part of it was just listening to what was going on, because, the rest of the table ignored the fact he spent 3 rounds not taking an action, just asking questions that everybody refused to answer. And so with the noble cat brain logic, he took an action that, and once again, with our table, he knew he could get away with something like this too. And it turned out to be a good plot point. It turned out to be hilarious. Once they figured out, oh, this is what his character is doing, he's not selfish because he's that self-centered. He's just really naive, and we have to explain some basic things. And once that got in, it actually became a pretty fun part of the campaign. But that willingness to make your character grow, huge part for being a better player. And that could be embracing a character arc. It could be really paying attention to the story and thinking about, well, in what little ways might this change who my character is? Good, bad, something in the middle. It's also just sometimes rolling with it. My very first character was not supposed to be a raging alcoholic. But here's the thing. My one flaw on the sheet was maybe he likes wine a little bit too much. And then I went 4 months and I couldn't roll above an 8. And you think I'm exaggerating.
It's not an exaggeration. That I have yet to see a streak of luck that exceeds its length in terribleness.
He let me re-roll my stats because they were that bad, and I still had 3 single-digit stats at 9 with the second better set of numbers. So if you can do the math on that, yes, that is how that worked out. But I was like, okay, if I go from mildly likes his wine to raging alcoholic, it actually story-wise explains the terrible dice throws, and it kind of made it funny. And so I just kind of ran with it. It wasn't the original plan, but it worked out with what was going on. And that willingness to adapt a little bit, you're going to have so much fun with any campaign if you go a little bit more flexible versus a little bit too rigid. And I think I really can't think of an example that hasn't been true.
I agree. And if you're really just looking for the TLDR, it's about the journey, not the destination.
Yeah. Yep. Good way of putting it. And so, next step for being a better player, be willing to do something different. I love certain stories. I love character concepts. I come from kind of a fiction background. So sometimes when I get an idea, I really try to run with it. It probably my favorite character I've ever played. And it would not surprise me if he ends up being the favorite character I ever play. Adonis Averici. Bard. Was I planning to be a bard? No. Was I planning to, be a tiefling? No. Was I planning anything like that for the campaign? No. But we'll point once again to dice rolling. I had a couple ideas of what I wanted to do, but I needed at least 2 good stats. And I failed miserably to produce dice rolls that gave me 2 good stats. I had one really good one. That's probably a 12, Shane. And then I had dump stats. So I had to find a character based on 1 stat who I could justify only having 1 stat. So I was like, you know what? Bard looks interesting. I've never tried it. I can't sing, so I have to think of a creative way to do this role-playing. Make him a tiefling, since he's in this world where apparently tieflings were not the most popular individuals. I was like, let's just bard it up, see what happens, cause some trouble, and maybe I'll enjoy it. And to me, it was the first time I played a magic caster. It's the first time I really played a support cast, because even when I played the ranger, he was very much the offensive guy in that campaign up to about level 10. Pretty much everything about this character was not planned. It was not in my normal wheelhouse. Long story short, I played my favorite character ever. Had all kinds of stories we're talking about 2 years later still, every time the group gets together. And Bard is now my favorite class. Be willing to try something different.
Absolutely. And for me, a lot of what I've done is I've basically made it a point that I try not to use the same character class twice in 5th edition until I've tried them all once. And I'm most of the way through that list. I think there's only 2 or 3 classes I've not tried at all yet. And I've also tried different variations off of classes that I've played in earlier editions that just did not look appealing at the time, and one of my favorite discoveries that ended up just completely aggravating our DM for that campaign was the Divination Wizard. Divination was kind of a joke in 3rd edition, but In 5th edition, it actually had some cool class features that basically allowed me to reroll lots and lots of dice a day to the point where basically I could do pretty much what I wanted so long as I didn't run into a ton of different problems in a given day.
Yep. And I think that's kind of the interesting thing. If you just don't know where your best stories are going to come from. And it's okay, you can have a favorite. I know you've said multiple times that Wizard is pretty much your favorite class in the campaigns that have that class.
Mm-hmm.
Or even in modern ones, you like the closest equivalent to a spellcaster. I chose a Ranger first time because I'm very outdoorsy, I'm into survival topics. So those are characters I enjoyed playing. I kind of enjoyed the archery thing. And so Bard is not a class I thought I would necessarily like, but it was a blast. And, generally speaking, I don't think Cleric and Paladin might be my favorite classes, but I'm sure I will find an interesting way to play them just to see. And so just be willing to try something a little bit different. If you ever run out of ideas in the future, you can go back to your fallbacks and your mainstays. But just by trying and stretching out other characters, some you may like a lot, some you may end up hating. But that just lets you be an even better player because you can avoid those pit traps in the future. If there's a character that just doesn't work, you can figure out why that is, and anytime you replay that system or a similar one, just step aside, avoid those issues, and you can just kind of move on from there.
And that really leads in to one of the next areas that we want to kind of touch on for being a better player, and that's communicating with the DM a little bit about your character themselves. Not necessarily about their class or anything, but just about who they are as a person or a catfolk or a tiefling or whatever else you've decided to play, and how they're going to react to certain types of situations. And we've touched on this a little bit already in earlier topics, but it's important enough that we felt that we needed to touch on it separately as well, because without a developed character personality, without a developed idea of who they are, what motivates them, and where they're going, there's not going to be those avenues for growth. There's not going to be those avenues for learning different things. You want to make sure that you are working with everyone rather than trying to Shanghai the story in your own direction.
And I think a really good kind of example of that was actually the last campaign you ran for our group. It was Dresden, it was Fate System, very story heavy, and a lot happened. To give you an idea, he thought it was going to be like over 6 weeks in Gameland. We literally did this happened Monday, this happened Tuesday, this happened Wednesday, world almost ended on Saturday, and session was over by Sunday. So we managed to really pack in that game, but because so much was happening and some of our characters had really varied backgrounds, more than once in campaign, like I would come to Braden afterwards and say, hey, this character is 22, he's smart in some ways and idiot in some. Just so you know, I think this situation probably has him thinking this way. And I wouldn't necessarily, it wasn't to dictate what was going to happen, it was just to let Braden's DM know, hey, there's 2 or 3 different ways I could see him thinking I would react to this situation. And I wanted to let him know, okay, well, this character is in this weird growth place. He's in this kind of traumatic situation. He's still a smartass, but this is kind of where his mind and defense mechanisms are going. And so that way, next session, if he did something that seemed a little bit abnormal, Braden actually knew his DM where the thought process was coming from.
And another good example of a character in that campaign who was actually fairly communicative about their motivations, even if they weren't always clear on where they were going to stand on them at all times, was the player who was playing the cop.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of opportunity for character growth because mortals really kind of get the short end of the stick in the Dresden universe. You don't want to be a vanilla mortal most of the time because, yes, while you get extra fate chips, you don't have access to any of the cool powers that allow you to deal with the sheer amount of catastrophe that the Dresden verse is known for.
And that's before players like us get a hold of it and compound everything.
Oh, yeah. But because I was able to get an understanding of those motivations, it kind of helped me to foster an environment where two characters that started off as complete and utter enemies ended up becoming a very strong alliance by the end.
Yeah, and there was actually a lot of shifting in that campaign that went like that. And there were some tense moments too, but it really worked out because there was a lot of talking to the DM afterwards. I mean, at one point, we had the conversation of, hey, Braden, do I need to roll up a new character? Because I'm not 100% sure if I have decisions, if I can do anything, or if I'm backed into a corner and am a glorified puppet. And to Braden's credit, his honest response was, I'm not 100% sure yet. Let me get back to you in a couple days. And once he was sure, like, looking at everything, no, you do have agency. You're not a glorified NPC. You do have the ability to still make decisions and change things. Like, okay, cool. Because I had no interest playing 3 sessions of a campaign where I basically couldn't do anything. If you've had a bad DM before, you don't want to be the puppet at the end of the strings. You want some ability to contribute to that group story. But having that ability to talk to the DM and say, okay, this is happening, or, hey, just so you know, I think my character has had a really big growth moment based on what happened in the last 2 sessions, and here's the new aspect I think he should have. And you have never seen a DM's face light up until you have been the bane of his existence for 3 years, and then you hand him a card with the aspect, oh crap, I think I'm in love for your character. And his face just lit up. But based on what happened in the campaign, no, this makes sense. This would radically change the motivations of how my character reacts in certain situations. And it gave him a clear roadmap for what he could do with my character through the end of the story, too. But that wasn't possible without that DM communication.
And I gotta tell you, that new aspect did not disappoint.
No, it didn't. And, yeah, I made a lot of questionable decisions based on that aspect, but, and I still can't believe I didn't die in that campaign. I came as close as you could. I was like on dancing on the knife's edge without my tap shoes, but, what a campaign.
That was a ton of fun.
And since we're talking about help with the DM, do your best to learn as a player. We're all busy. None of us do this full time. I mean, none of us are on Critical Role or anything like that. So in our case, we have jobs, we have lives, we have things to do. But when you get together, try to spend that extra time to learn the system a little bit more, to know how your spells work, to try to get some of the details so you can take the pressure off of the DM. And, at the end of the day, they're going to have final say on how something works. But, man, there is nothing that's more jarring in a campaign of, oh, how does that spell work? Oh, I'm not sure. Do you know how it works? And then you're both flipping over Brooks looking for that spell. It's like, okay, it's best to get the details right, but that's a 4-minute delay for everybody that takes you out of the immersion that shouldn't happen. And we've had times in the campaign where I come back, like the 4-year one we did with me, and I come back and say, okay guys, just so you know, we've been misusing Counterspell badly. Here are the 2 details. This is why it seems overpowered. From now on, this is how it works, and that applies to you, NPCs, whatever. We weren't going to retcon anything, but it was just important for everyone to get that information. And even if you can understand what your character class does a little bit, or understand the skills you have a little bit, so your DM doesn't have to look things up, or you can answer a question for them when they ask, that's huge. That really is.
It is, and learning as a player isn't strictly limited to a game system either. Shane said something interesting earlier that really applies here, and that's that he feels that he's broken some or most of these rules at one point or another as a player. And in all honesty, most players have. So it's important to recognize when you've messed up and what you can do to not just make amends, but keep it from happening again. That's part of growing both as a player and as a person as a whole.
Yeah, and we're all human, and sometimes you try to go for, you give people the benefit of the doubt, and sometimes a campaign session may slide where you didn't intend to take the spotlight, and just a few rolls or a few things happen and kind of went that way. Like, everyone's pretty forgiving. We've all seen that happen too, where, okay, it turned out to be so-and-so player's show that whole night, but they weren't trying to seize it, it went sideways in a way that made it that way. And that's cool, that happens. You just want to make sure that you're not consistently a repeat offender, basically, where you're doing the same thing over and over in a way that makes the game less fun for those that you are playing with. And I think the big one at the end, because I have been in 2 campaigns where this blew up at some point, and it's never any fun. Resolve major arguments outside of session.
Yeah, I can't understate how important this is for a variety of reasons. One, it makes it easier to isolate grievances and work them out in a one-on-one or one-on-one-on-one if the argument's between 2 players and the DM.
Yeah.
And another area where it can be really beneficial to do that is if there are long-standing issues. You've got a player, for example, who's rules lawyering, and it wasn't a big deal for the first session or 2, but it's been a repeating trend, and it's actually breaking immersion and causing problems. The last thing you want to do is call them out in the middle of the session and further break immersion if it can be avoided.
Yeah.
You want to basically move along, keep things going as smoothly as possible, and then after session, pull that player aside and have a chat with them. 1, to let them know, hey, this is an issue, it needs to be fixed. And 2, to not basically put a negative version of the spotlight on them and embarrass them in front of the table.
Yeah, and, a lot of us are extremely passionate about role-playing, and so sometimes emotions will boil over into the real world. And that happens. It shows you're with a passionate group of people. It shows you're with people who really care about what's going on. And those are net positive things, like 99% of the time. But that does mean that once in a while, it can quickly spill over and go sideways to something that isn't. And just taking the major arguments out of session more than once, it's perfectly acceptable to say to a DM, hey, there were a few things I'm really unsure about with this. Can we talk after session? And that's okay. End of session, it might be a way you diffuse something you don't like during session as well. Because it can be a clear sign of maybe the DM is reading a situation wrong or another character is. And that tells you enough to okay, we'll just quickly sidestep this and then people can work it out afterwards. That way the campaign goes in. An issue between either 2 players or a player and a DM does not become a shouting match at a table of 7 people, which is no fun for anybody who has ever been in that situation. And being able to resolve something out of session, it just should be good communication. And I've been really fortunate in the fact that I've only been role-playing about, I guess it's been 5 years now, but I've only basically been with 3 groups, which generally have some overlap. And I've never had a bad group. And I've never had a bad DM. And so I'm extremely fortunate on both those counts. Not everyone's going to be that lucky. But most of the time, don't assume someone's intentionally out to get you. Unless it becomes kind of apparent outside a session that they are. And that does happen. But even if that is the case, where someone's driving you down for reasons that aren't fair or are just childish, you should still resolve it outside a session. The blowout in the middle of anything, it doesn't help a case. It doesn't help anyone who's there. it kind of takes away from your chance of mending things up in a good way. And so that's the big one. And believe, heat of the moment, that can be rough. And that doesn't mean you have to hide everything. There have been a couple moments where I know in session, like, okay, I'm really pissed off. I just need to stop. And I'm like, hey, can I talk to you outside of session? It was clear to everyone at the table I was unhappy. But it was important for you to take that step back, because sometimes when you calm down, you realize, I think I blew that up beyond what it should have been, and I would have really been the bad guy if I had just gone one step further. And
amazing what happens when you add a little time to cool off into the equation.
Exactly. And, sometimes it may turn out that you were doing little things you didn't even realize till someone points it out, and then it just clicks like, oh, I maybe kind of deserve that. And so it's just little things, or you might be triggering someone's pet peeve you don't even know about. And that's where, just, if you feel that temper coming up, take a breather. If you're DM and you see a potential explosion, maybe call a break. And just go from there. And if you give kind of that benefit of the doubt and you're willing to have the major arguments outside of session, that's just A+ work being a player. When you're unhappy but you are willing to take the high road and do things right, that is just better for every single person involved. And you will feel much better about yourself for handling it that way.
Agreed. But now we want to hear from you. Tell us a little bit about what you think makes a good player in the comments below. Do you agree with everything that we had to say here? Do you disagree with any of the points?
Was 7 Electrum too much or too little?
Too little, obviously.
All right. Well, okay. For less obvious questions, then talk to the comments. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. It is a free and easy way to get awesome new videos of us and really support the channel, which we appreciate. Tell us any home rules you've had that make for a better gaming experience. Share that with all of us. And until next time, good gaming.
See you next time.
If you like what you just saw, please support us by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more great gaming content.